At 90 miles per hour, I learned that freedom had a price, and my stepfather was willing to collect it with my life. The cab of the pickup smelled of gasoline and stale cigarettes, the kind of odor that clung to every mile Wayne Douglas drove across Oklahoma. I pressed my shoulder against the passenger door, fighting for space, but the harder I leaned away, the closer his voice cut into me. "You think you are a Marine now, Clara. You think that uniform makes you somebody. Out here, you are nothing." His laughter rattled through the truck louder than the radio, a jagged sound that told me he had already made up his mind. The highway stretched black and endless I-40 in the middle of a summer night heat still rising off the pavement. Headlights sliced the darkness in white streaks, every mile marker flashing like the tick of a clock running out. My fingers locked around the worn handle on the door palms, slick with sweat. I could feel the engine shudder under the hood, could feel the truck straining against the asphalt. I thought about drill instructors yelling at me to hold a plank longer, to push through pain, to breathe through fire. But no training had prepared me for the moment when family turned predator. For a second, my mind betrayed me. It drifted back to when I was 8 years old, sitting on the porch in Tulsa, waiting for my real dad to come home. He never did. The funeral had been closed casket, a memory of folded flags and silent tears. That was when Wayne appeared, a man with a strong handshake and a truck that smelled just the same as tonight. He told my mother he would protect us. He told me to call him Dad. I had tried once, and he laughed like it was a joke. After that, I stuck with Wayne. The truck swerved slightly, and my body slammed against the door. I gasped and clung harder, nails digging into plastic. Wayne's jaw flexed, his knuckles white against the wheel. "You are not going back to that base," he growled. "Not to those people who fill your head with lies." His words throbbed in my ears like drum beats. Another flash boot camp at Paris Island, the sting of sand in my eyes, the burning in my arms as I did push-ups until I could hardly move. A sergeant screaming that weakness was death, and yet in that hell, I had felt free for the first time. Nobody there cared about Wayne. Nobody there cared that I had been the quiet girl in Tulsa with second-hand shoes. They only cared if I showed up, if I endured. That memory cut through the fear, reminded me that I was more than the grip trying to shove me aside. But then another memory struck my mother sitting at the kitchen table, eyes rimmed red, whispering apologies she could never finish. She told me once she stayed because she was afraid of what he would do if she left. Now, as the wind roared and Wayne's shoulder pressed into me, I understood her terror in a way I never wanted to. The speedometer climbed past 90. The roar of the tires became thunder. Wayne shouted again. "You think you can live without me? Let us see you survive this." His arm lunged forward, shoving with all the force of years of bitterness. Time slowed. The door cracked open under the weight of his push. My body tilted into nothingness. My mind exploded with fragments, the sound of my mother's voice calling my name when I left for basic training, the taste of grit from the parade ground, the way the flag rose at dawn, the promise I had made to myself that I would never be controlled again. The wind yanked me outward. My last thought before the road hit was that Wayne would finally have what he wanted, my silence. But silence never came. Instead came pain, raw and electric, as my body struck asphalt. I rolled and scraped, tumbling through sparks of agony. The world spun in streaks of black and red headlights, scattering like stars. My breath tore from me in ragged gasps. I should have been gone, yet I clung to each second with claws invisible but strong. When I finally stopped sliding, the night was a ringing void. The truck's taillights shrank into the distance, disappearing like a promise never kept. I pressed my palms against the gravel, trembling, whispering to myself, "I am still here. I am still alive." The taste of blood mixed with dust, the ache of every bone screaming, but I could not let go of that thought. Then another light approached. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, the brain clinging to hope. But it grew brighter, steady, deliberate. Tires slowed, gravel crunched, and a vehicle stopped. A door opened. Boots struck the pavement with certainty, the kind of sound that belonged to men who had marched through war. A voice called out, calm but commanding, asking if I could hear him. I lifted my head, vision blurred, and saw the outline of a uniform. The insignia caught the glow. A colonel, a Marine colonel. And in that moment, broken on the side of I-40, I understood my story had not ended with Wayne's shove. It was only beginning. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a small two-bedroom house that creaked whenever the wind blew hard enough to rattle the windows. My earliest memories were not of danger, but of warmth. My father, John Mitchell, was a quiet man who worked at a machine shop near the Arkansas River. He carried grease under his nails and smelled of metal shavings and strong coffee, but when he lifted me onto his shoulders, I believed I was taller than the world. He taught me to ride a bike on cracked sidewalks and told me that if I ever fell, I should get back up, brush off the dirt, and keep pedaling. That lesson stayed with me longer than he did. When I was 6, my father died suddenly from a heart attack. I remember the day as a blur of hushed voices, neighbors dropping off casseroles, and my mother sitting on the edge of the bed with her face in her hands. The house grew quiet in a way that silence itself seemed heavier than noise. At the funeral, I clutched a folded flag in hands too small to understand what forever meant. From that moment, the rhythm of my childhood broke. My mother, Linda, was 32 and terrified of raising a child alone. She had worked part-time as a cashier at a grocery store, and after my father's death, she picked up more hours, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. For a while, it was just the two of us. We ate macaroni and cheese from the box we sang along to the radio while cleaning the house, and at night I would sometimes crawl into her bed because the absence of my father made the dark feel colder. Then Wayne Douglas appeared. He drove a long-haul truck and met my mother at a local diner. He was older, with sun-creased skin and a voice that carried the weight of too many cigarettes. At first, he seemed like a rescue. He took my mother out to dinner, brought flowers, and even gave me a stuffed bear with a red ribbon. For a short time, it felt like maybe we could be a family again. But masks can be worn for only so long. By the time I turned 8, Wayne had moved in. The truck smell followed him into our house, gasoline sweat and tobacco. He made rules: quickly lights out by 9, no friends over without permission, and always say thank you when food is served. On the surface, these rules sounded like discipline, but underneath them was something else: control. He wanted to dictate every breath. When I was 9, I tried calling him Dad once because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. He laughed, not kindly, but with a sneer. He said, "Don't call me that. I'm not here to be your buddy. I'm here to set you straight." From that moment, I knew my place in the house had shifted from daughter to burden. School became my refuge. At Jefferson Elementary, I found escape in books, especially history. I read about soldiers and battles, about discipline and honor. Those stories planted seeds I did not yet understand. At home, Wayne's criticism grew sharper. If I brought home a B instead of an A, he said I was lazy. If I lingered too long after school, he accused me of trying to avoid chores. My mother, caught in the middle, tried to soften his edges, but often she fell silent, afraid of igniting another outburst. By the time I reached high school, the house felt like a cage. Wayne demanded I hand over any money I earned from babysitting or part-time work, insisting it went toward family expenses. He checked my phone, forbade me from dating, and reminded me constantly that under his roof I had no freedom. His favorite phrase became, "This is my house, my rules. You're just lucky I put food in your mouth." I carried those words like chains. But inside, rebellion simmered. I joined junior ROTC at Booker T, Washington High School. At first, Wayne mocked me. He said I was playing soldier, pretending to be tough, but the uniform gave me something he could not control: pride. When I stood in formation with my peers, I felt like I belonged to something larger than myself. I learned how to march, how to salute, how to follow orders, and most importantly, how to believe in my own strength. Still, home was a battlefield. Wayne's temper flared whenever I asserted independence. If I asked to stay late at school, he accused me of trying to escape. If I saved money instead of handing it over, he demanded to know where it went. He always found ways to remind me of my supposed weakness. Sometimes he would block the doorway just to show me that my 5'5" frame was no match for his. The message was clear: resistance was useless. My mother's silence hurt most. She worked long shifts at the grocery store and avoided conflict at home. At night, I sometimes heard her crying in the bathroom, muffling her sobs with a towel. Once, when I begged her to leave him, she whispered, "I'm scared, Clara. I don't know what he would do." Her fear chained her to him, and by extension, chained me too. At 16, I made my decision. I would leave not just for college or a job, but for something bigger, something Wayne could never touch. I contacted a Marine Corps recruiter. The man looked me in the eye and said the Marines would make me stronger than I ever imagined. I signed up for the delayed entry program, planning my escape one day at a time. When Wayne found out, his fury was volcanic. He slammed his fist on the kitchen table and shouted that no daughter of his was going to waste her life wearing a uniform. He called it a man's world, said I would never survive, said I would crawl back begging him for help. I didn't flinch, though inside my chest burned with terror. For the first time, I looked him in the eyes and told him I was going. He leaned so close I could smell the sour alcohol on his breath and hissed, "Not unless I say so." The night before I left for boot camp at Paris Island, I lay awake in my bed staring at the ceiling. My mother slipped into the room, sat beside me, and brushed my hair back from my forehead. Her hands trembled. She whispered, "Be strong, baby. Stronger than me." Then she kissed my cheek and slipped back into the shadows. It was the last soft moment we had together before everything shattered. At Paris Island, I found both torment and liberation. Drill instructors stripped away every trace of weakness, barking orders from dawn until night. I carried 50-pound packs, crawled through mud, and learned to fire a rifle with precision. Every blister, every bruise, every muscle ache reminded me that I was forging a new identity. Away from Wayne's grip, I discovered resilience I had never known. For the first time, I felt free. Yet even in freedom, shadows followed me. I thought of my mother alone in Tulsa, still under Wayne's rule. I thought of his threats, his laugh, his words echoing in my head. I promised myself I would never return, but life in the Marines still tied me to home through leave periods. I knew the day would come when I would have to face him again. That day arrived sooner than I wanted. After completing training and being stationed at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, I was granted my first leave. Part of me longed to see my mother, but another part knew the risk. Still, duty to family pulled me back to Oklahoma. I stepped off the bus in Tulsa wearing my uniform. My boots polished my spine straight. People glanced with respect, some nodding, some smiling. I felt proud until I saw Wayne waiting in the pickup, arms crossed, jaw tight. His eyes told me that in his world, nothing had changed. I climbed into the truck, knowing I was stepping back into a prison disguised as a home. The air smelled the same, the house looked the same, but I was not the same. Wayne didn't care. He still believed I was his to command. He demanded my pay, told me to follow his rules, mocked the discipline I had earned. I clenched my fists, but kept silent, storing every word, every threat, every insult like ammunition for the battle I knew was coming. I was 19. I was a Marine, and I had promised myself never to bow again. But Wayne had his own promise that he would never let me go without a fight. Returning to Oklahoma for my first leave felt like stepping into a trap I could see but couldn't avoid. The Greyhound bus hissed as it pulled into Tulsa's station, and the air smelled of dust and diesel. I wore my Marine Corps uniform not for show, but because it reminded me who I had become. I thought maybe Wayne would see me differently, that the sight of me in pressed blues might silence his sneer. Instead, he leaned against his F-150 arms, crossed, a cigarette burning between his fingers, eyes narrow with disdain. "Well, if it isn't Little Miss Soldier," he said as I walked up, duffel bag on my shoulder. "Think you're tough now? Don't forget whose house you're walking into." I clenched my jaw and slid into the passenger seat without replying. The drive home was silent except for the thrum of the tires. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the house hadn't changed, peeling paint, a porch that sagged a yard littered with beer cans. Inside, my mother hugged me tightly, tears glistening in her eyes. For a moment, I felt warmth, but Wayne's cough behind us broke the spell. At dinner that night, Wayne bragged to the neighbors who dropped by that his girl was off playing soldier, pretending pride he never felt. He passed around beers, laughed too loud, and called me our little warrior. But once the door shut and the guests left, his smile vanished. He demanded I hand over the pay I had earned. "That check you're getting, that belongs to this family," he growled. "You don't get to waste it on junk. You live under my roof, you contribute. I explained that Marines were paid modestly, that I needed my money for my own needs, but he slammed his fist on the table so hard the plates rattled. My mother winced, eyes lowered. I slipped an envelope from my bag, already prepared, containing most of my earnings. He snatched it like a thief counting the bills with greedy fingers. He didn't notice I had hidden a smaller envelope inside my uniform jacket money I had vowed he would never touch. The days dragged. Every morning Wayne barked orders as if I were a servant. Mow the lawn, fix the gutters, run errands. He relished reducing me as if stripping away the pride I had gained in the Corps. My mother tiptoed around him serving meals quietly, trying to prevent explosions. But no one could prevent Wayne's rage when it came. One evening after I refused to give him the burner phone I had bought with hidden cash, he cornered me in the kitchen. His breath reeked of whiskey. You think you're clever hiding things from me? You think those people in uniform will protect you here? This is my world, Clara, mine. He shoved me against the counter, the edge digging into my back. I remembered Paris Island, remembered drill instructors screaming in my face, pushing me to the edge of collapse. I had survived worse than his stench and his threats. I straightened locked eyes with him and whispered, I don't belong to you. For a moment, he looked stunned, as if the girl who used to shrink from his voice had disappeared. Then his face twisted, veins bulging in his neck. He stormed off muttering curses, but I knew it wasn't over. My mother tried to soothe me later, whispering that I should just keep the peace until I returned to base. He'll calm down, she said. Don't push him. I wanted to scream that it wasn't my job to manage his violence, but instead I nodded. She was too afraid to hear the truth. The storm broke 2 nights later. Wayne came home angrier than usual, slamming doors and pacing the living room like a caged animal. When I refused to give him the rest of my paycheck, he exploded. You think you can walk out of here like some hero? I'll make sure you never set foot on that base again. His words cut through me sharper than any knife. He lunged, grabbing my arm so tightly it left bruises. I fought back, twisting, remembering self-defense drills, but his grip was iron. He dragged me toward the door, muttering, You'll learn who's in charge once and for all. Outside, the night air was thick and humid. He shoved me into the F-150's passenger seat, slammed the door, and roared the engine to life. My mother appeared in the doorway, frozen in fear, lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. I locked eyes with her through the glass, silently pleading, but then the truck lurched forward and she vanished into the darkness behind us. The highway stretched out like a black ribbon under the moonlight. Wayne pushed the accelerator, the engine growling, as the speedometer climbed past 70, then 80. The wind tore through the open windows, whipping my hair across my face. My stomach knotted. You think you're free, he shouted over the roar. You think that uniform makes you somebody. You're nothing without me. Nothing! I tried to stay calm, scanning for a way out. I gripped the handle above the door, bracing myself as the truck swerved. Every bone in my body screamed at me to fight, to resist, but instinct told me to wait. Then his words shifted from threats to prophecy. I'll make sure you never come back. Not to that damn base, not to your fancy life. You'll learn tonight. He jerked the wheel, swerving onto I-40, the road stretching endlessly ahead. My pulse hammered. He glanced at me with wild eyes, then reached across, shoving my shoulder. Out you go, little Marine. Let's see if you can march now. I clutched the seatbelt, heart racing. His hands pried mine loose. For a split second, time slowed. I saw flashes: my father teaching me to ride a bike, my mother kissing my forehead, the drill field at Paris Island, my fellow recruits sweating under the sun. A lifetime condensed into a breath. Then his palm hit my chest and I flew backward out of the truck. The road rose to meet me, a blur of asphalt and sparks. My body hit hard, rolled, scraped. Pain lit up every nerve as I tumbled. I heard the roar of the engine fading, his laughter swallowed by the night. I came to rest on the shoulder skin, raw ribs screaming. Blood slicked my palms. My vision blurred, but I knew one thing: I was alive. Barely, but alive. For a moment, lying on that stretch of I-40 outside Oklahoma City, I thought this was the end. Then headlights appeared, cutting through the dark. A vehicle slowed, tires crunching on gravel. Doors opened. Heavy boots hit the ground. I forced my eyes open and saw a figure in uniform, broad shoulders, silver oak leaves glinting. A Marine colonel. He knelt beside me, voice steady but urgent. "Stay with me, Marine. You're safe now?" Safe. A word I hadn't believed in for years. As consciousness slipped, I clung to that voice, to the promise that maybe, just maybe, Wayne hadn't won. The night had swallowed the highway whole. The only light came from the pale glow of the moon and the hard white beams of the truck's headlights cutting through the dark. The speedometer needle hovered at 90, trembling with the vibration of the engine. My stepfather's hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles shone like bone. The roar of the tires swallowed every thought except survival. Wind tore at my face, my hair snapping against my cheeks, and every bump in the road jolted through my spine. I pressed against the passenger door, fighting the urge to panic, counting breaths, the way drill instructors had taught me, steady in, steady out. Beside me, Wayne leaned closer, his whiskey-stained breath hot against my ear. "You think those Marines made you strong?" he shouted over the wind. "But you're still mine. You'll always be mine." His words were jagged, meant to break me, but I stared forward, clinging to silence. The truck swerved suddenly, the tires shrieking as we crossed lanes. Horns blared from cars, forced aside red taillights, flashing like warning signs. He laughed, a cruel, high sound that made my stomach clench. "Scared yet, little soldier," he taunted. "You can march all day on some base, but out here, you're nothing but a scared kid." My hands gripped the door handle until my knuckles ached. I thought of my mother standing frozen in the doorway, her lips trembling but her voice absent. I thought of my father gone too soon, who once told me to get back on the bike no matter how hard I fell. And I thought of the drill instructors at Paris Island, their voices thunderous, pushing me past exhaustion. They had broken me down so I could learn what it meant to endure. Wayne jerked the wheel again, laughter echoing. "Maybe it's time you learn what real strength looks like." The road blurred past endless asphalt stretching into nothing. I realized there was no reasoning with him, no chance to fight back in this speeding cage. His eyes burned wild, fixed on me like I was prey he had cornered. My pulse hammered in my throat. Then he reached across one hand, leaving the wheel. His palm slammed against my shoulder, forcing me sideways. I clawed at the seatbelt, desperate to anchor myself. The truck wavered, fishtailing slightly, but he didn't slow. His face twisted into a sneer as he shoved again. "This is the end of your little rebellion," he hissed. "Say goodbye to your freedom." The world slowed. In that suspended moment, my mind flashed through a lifetime. I saw myself as a child, clutching a folded flag at my father's funeral. I saw my mother weary and silent, trapped in fear. I saw myself on the drill field, sweat stinging my eyes, Sergeant's voice booming. Pain is temporary. Discipline lasts. I saw the flag I carried at JROTC parades, the pride of standing taller than my years. All those pieces of me collided as his hand struck once more. The force ripped me free. The seatbelt unlatched, metal clicking like a final command. My body lifted weightless for an instant, then hurled into the night. The asphalt met me with brutal certainty. My shoulder struck first, then my hip, then everything at once. Pain tore through me as I rolled, sparks flying from metal buckles scraping the road. The taste of blood filled my mouth, hot and coppery. My ears rang, drowning out the roar of the truck, now fading into distance. I tumbled across the shoulder until finally I slid to a stop on rough gravel. My chest heaved, lungs burning. My hands scraped raw ribs, screaming with every shallow breath. For a moment, the sky spun above me, stars streaking like smudges across black ink. I lay there stunned, wondering if this was where it ended. But my heart still pounded. Against all odds, I was alive. The silence pressed in. No truck, no laughter, just the chirp of crickets and the faint hum of traffic far away. My vision blurred, but I saw faint streaks of red where my skin had torn blood, trickling warm against the cool night air. Every nerve in my body screamed, yet deep inside a fire sparked. He hadn't finished me. Not yet. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing larger, brighter. For an instant, fear surged. What if it was Wayne coming back? My fingers twitched toward the gravel, ready to crawl into the ditch, but the vehicle slowed, pulling onto the shoulder. Brakes hissed, and the crunch of tires on gravel reached my ears. The door opened. Boots hit the ground with the heavy, deliberate rhythm I knew instantly. Military. A figure loomed above me, broad shoulders outlined against the headlights. His uniform bore the Silver Eagle insignia glinting faintly in the light. A Marine colonel. He crouched beside me, his face, steady eyes, sharp. "You're going to be okay, Marine," he said, voice firm but calm. "Stay with me. You're safe now." Safe. The word struck like a lifeline. My lips parted, but no sound came. Blood clogged my throat, my chest rising in shallow, ragged pulls. I clung to his voice like it was the only anchor left in the world. Behind him, another man hurried over with a med kit. They worked fast, pressing gauze against my wounds, checking my pulse, asking questions I barely heard. All I could think was that a fellow Marine had found me, that I wasn't alone on this road. As the colonel barked orders to call an ambulance, I felt tears sting my eyes, not from pain, but from the crushing wave of relief. Wayne had thrown me out, tried to erase me, but here I was, alive, rescued not by chance, but by the very brotherhood he despised. Darkness edged my vision, pulling me under, but before it swallowed me, I heard the colonel's voice again, steady and certain. "You survived the road. Now it's time to take back your life." Those words branded themselves into me as the world went black. The first thing I felt when consciousness returned was the sterile sting of antiseptic. White light burned against my eyelids so harsh, I thought for a moment I was back on the rifle range with the sun glaring off steel. But then the sharp beep of a monitor registered steady and unrelenting, and I knew I was somewhere safe. The hospital room smelled faintly of bleach and plastic. My body felt heavy leaden, each movement resisted by pain. My ribs throbbed like they were bound in iron, my arms were covered in gauze, and my face pulsed with bruises I hadn't yet seen. "You're awake." The voice was deep calm and carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. I turned my head, wincing at the pull in my neck, and saw him, the Marine colonel who had found me on the highway. He sat beside the bed in a chair too small for his frame, his posture still upright like even rest couldn't soften discipline. His uniform jacket was folded neatly on the chair beside him, leaving only his plain olive shirt. The insignia on the folded cloth confirmed what I had glimpsed through my blurred vision: Colonel Richard Alvarez. "You gave us a scare," he continued, "but you're going to be all right. Broken ribs, a mild concussion, a dozen cuts and bruises. Nothing you can't recover from." I swallowed, my throat raw. The words came out as a rasp. "Wayne." His jaw tightened. "Your stepfather." He took off. "But he won't be hard to find." My dashcam caught everything. Relief and dread tangled inside me. Proof. For years it had been my word against his temper, my bruises explained away as clumsiness, my fear disguised as obedience. But now there was evidence clear and undeniable. Yet evidence also meant confrontation. Alvarez seemed to read the swirl in my eyes. "Listen, Mitchell. You survived something most wouldn't. That means you don't waste the chance. You take back control." "Understand." Tears burned before I could stop them. Marines didn't cry, not in front of officers. But these weren't tears of weakness. They were years of silence breaking open. I nodded. The following days blurred into a cycle of nurses adjusting IV lines, doctors checking bandages and pain meds, dragging me into half-dreams. My mother visited once, her face pale guilt carved into every line. She clutched my hand but avoided my eyes. "I didn't know he'd do this," she whispered. Her words sounded more like an apology to herself than to me. She left quickly, as if afraid he would walk through the door. Colonel Alvarez visited every day. Sometimes he brought paperwork. Sometimes just sat silently, his presence filling the room like a shield. On the third day, he placed a laptop on the tray table. "I want you to see this." The video played. Dashcam footage grainy but clear. Wayne's truck swerving his arm, shoving me out, my body flung into the road. Alvarez's SUV pulling over, headlights cutting across my crumpled form. I turned my face away, bile rising. "Hard to watch," Alvarez said, "but this is what will keep him from pretending it was an accident." The police arrived soon after, their questions polite but perfunctory at first. One officer, gray-haired, with a lined face, tilted his head skeptically. "Family fights get out of hand. Maybe she jumped." Alvarez's voice cut like steel. "I watched it happen. I have the footage." "She didn't jump. She was pushed." "Don't minimize what you saw because it happened inside a family." The officer straightened under his glare, nodded, and scribbled faster. For the first time, I felt the tide shifting. When NCIS agents showed up, Naval Criminal Investigative Service called because I was an active-duty Marine, the seriousness deepened. They asked about years of abuse, about Wayne's control of my pay, about the bruises I'd hidden. Each question forced me to peel back scars I had buried. I spoke carefully, voice steady, because I realized every word mattered now. News spread quickly. Local media caught wind of Marine injured in domestic assault on I-40. The Oklahoman ran a headline with my name, my uniform photo from boot camp, and the words, "Betrayed by Stepfather." Neighbors who once looked the other way now shook their heads in pity or outrage. At first, I hated the attention. But Alvarez explained it differently. Public pressure matters. Courts move faster when eyes are watching. Don't be ashamed of surviving. Let people see the truth. In the quiet moments alone, I wrestled with guilt and anger. My mother still lived with Wayne when he wasn't on the run. Had she known he was capable of this? Had she chosen to ignore the signs? Each memory replayed with sharper edges. Her silence, her lowered eyes, her whispered excuses. Part of me wanted to hate her. Another part still longed for her love. Emotional undulation was no longer a storytelling technique. It was my life. One night I woke to find Alvarez still sitting beside the bed. The clock read 2:17 a.m. I whispered, "Why are you here?" He shrugged lightly. "Because Marines don't leave their own behind. I saw what he tried to do. I won't let him finish it." The words pierced deeper than he knew. For years, I believed family was supposed to be protection, but mine had been the source of danger. Now a stranger bound to me only by uniform and duty offered the loyalty I had craved. Recovery was slow. Walking felt like dragging bricks tied to my ankles. Breathing deep sent knives through my ribs. But every step down the hospital hallway reminded me I hadn't been broken, only bent. Alvarez pushed me, not unkindly. "You've marched longer distances with heavier packs. Pain is a familiar enemy. Treat it the same." By the second week, the investigators told me charges were being prepared: attempted murder, aggravated assault. Wayne was in custody, found hiding at a cousin's house outside Tulsa. When I heard the news, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time, he wasn't looming just out of sight waiting to strike. He was caged. Still, justice required more than an arrest. There would be court testimony questions designed to twist the truth. Alvarez prepared me like he would a young Marine heading into a mission. "They'll try to rattle you. Don't let them. You speak the truth plainly. You look them in the eye and you make sure they see you're not afraid." In those moments, transformation began. I wasn't just a victim lying in a hospital bed. I was a Marine with evidence allies and a voice I refused to silence again. Each bruise faded, but the resolve hardened. The night before my release from the hospital, I sat by the window of the removed bandages snug against my ribs. Streetlights glowed orange outside, cars passing like distant shadows. Alvarez stepped in quietly. "Tomorrow, you go back to Camp Lejeune," he said. "But this isn't over. The courtroom is another battlefield. Are you ready?" I looked at him, at the man who had become both witness and mentor, and I answered without hesitation. "I survived the road. I'll survive this too, and I'll win." He nodded, once approval shining in his steady gaze. That's the spirit. Justice doesn't erase scars, but it shows others that silence is never the answer. Those words etched themselves into me. They weren't just for me. They were for anyone who had ever been told to stay quiet, to endure abuse behind closed doors. When the nurses wheeled me out the next morning, I stood instead, refusing the chair. Pain shot through my ribs, but I straightened. My boots struck the tile firmly. I walked under my own strength toward the waiting world, toward justice, toward transformation. The colonel followed behind, not as a savior, but as a reminder I was not alone anymore. Leaving the hospital was only the first step. Real freedom meant facing what had happened, not hiding from it. The drive back to Camp Lejeune felt strange, as if two worlds were colliding: the world of discipline and order I had found in the Marines and the chaos of the family I had left behind in Tulsa. Colonel Alvarez sat in the passenger seat beside me, a quiet guardian, his presence steady. He had arranged for transportation through military channels, not because he had to, but because he refused to let me go alone. At Camp Lejeune, word spread quickly. My platoon welcomed me back with a mixture of relief and awe. Some had seen the news articles, others had heard rumors. One corporal clapped me on the shoulder, careful not to jostle my ribs, and said, "Iron Clara. That's what we're calling you now." I forced a smile, but inside I carried a storm. Nicknames didn't erase fear, or the nights when I still woke up sweating, hearing the roar of tires and the echo of Wayne's laughter. Within days, the investigation gathered momentum. NCIS agents met me in a plain conference room on base files spread across the table. They asked for details of my life under Wayne's roof, of the control he exerted, the money he stole, the threats he made. Each question forced me to revisit memories I wanted to bury. I told them about the nights I lay awake listening to him curse my mother, about the times he demanded I hand over my part-time pay, about the way he mocked my JROTC uniform. Speaking it aloud was like peeling old wounds open, but with every confession the weight lightened just a fraction. They played the dashcam footage again, pausing to highlight key moments, his hand shoving me, my body tumbling out the truck, speeding away. Each pause cut me anew, but also reminded me the truth was visible. For once, there was no denying what he had done. The local police in Tulsa, embarrassed by their initial dismissal, reopened their files. Detectives called to confirm details, sometimes clumsy in their questions, sometimes apologetic. "We should have taken it more seriously from the start," one admitted. Their change of tone wasn't about me. It was about the footage Alvarez had provided and the pressure of public eyes. Public pressure grew fast. The Oklahoman ran a follow-up: Marine betrayed by Stepfather dashcam reveals highway horror. Television crews parked outside the courthouse. Talk radio buzzed with outrage. Callers debated what punishment Wayne deserved, some demanding life in prison, others focusing on the failure of local authorities to act sooner. I hated being the subject of debate, but Alvarez reminded me, every voice calling for justice makes it harder for him to hide. The military community rallied too. Veterans groups posted about my story on Facebook, sharing photos of me in uniform beside headlines. One Vietnam veteran wrote, "No Marine should ever have to fight for survival in her own family." Comments flooded in, some from strangers who confessed their own family traumas, others from mothers saying they wanted their daughters to hear my story. The support was overwhelming. Still, not everyone understood. In quiet moments, I overheard whispers. Why didn't she leave sooner? Why go back home if she knew it was dangerous? The questions stung, but I learned to steady my breath and remind myself survivors are always judged until people see the whole truth. That judgment only made me more determined to speak plainly when the time came. Alvarez drilled me for testimony the way he would train a Marine for inspection. "They'll try to twist your words. They'll say you provoked him, that you were disobedient. Stay calm. Stick to facts." We practiced in an empty office, him playing the role of defense attorney, his voice, sharp questions rapid. At first, I stumbled, anger boiling up, but slowly I learned to channel it into steady answers. Yes, he demanded my pay. Yes, he shoved me. No, I did not jump. Each repetition made me stronger. Meanwhile, Wayne sat in county jail awaiting trial. He pleaded not guilty, his lawyer arguing it was an accident. She opened the door herself, the attorney claimed. He tried to pull her back in, but the speed made it impossible. The story was ludicrous, but I knew lies could sway, if not countered with clarity. The prosecution gathered evidence beyond the dashcam. They interviewed neighbors who recalled Wayne's temper, coworkers who admitted he drank heavily, even an old police report my mother had filed years earlier after a violent argument. She had withdrawn it, but the record remained. My mother was subpoenaed to testify, her fear visible even before the trial began. I wrestled with anger toward her. She had known his violence, felt it, lived it, yet she stayed. But part of me also saw the trap fear, dependency shame. She was as much a prisoner as I had been. The difference was that I had found a way out and she had not. That realization softened my rage into something more complicated. The closer the trial loomed, the heavier the tension grew. Nights stretched long sleep fractured by nightmares of headlights and asphalt. In the darkness, I sometimes wondered if surviving made me stronger or just lonelier. But then I remembered Alvarez's words. You survived the road. Don't waste the chance. His belief in me anchored me when doubt threatened to pull me under. 2 weeks before the trial, I received a call from a local reporter asking for an interview. At first, I refused, but Alvarez encouraged me to consider it. Your story can help others. You don't have to share every detail, but if you speak, people will listen. I sat in a small studio, lights hot on my bruised skin. The reporter asked careful questions: what happened on I-40, what led up to it, what I wanted others to know. I told the truth without embellishment. Domestic abuse doesn't always look like broken bones. Sometimes it's control silence. Money taken, voices stifled. I thought leaving for the Marines would free me, but it followed me home. The only reason I'm alive is because someone stopped. Someone believed what they saw. Survivors deserve to be believed. When the segment aired, messages poured in. Women I had never met wrote, "Your story gave me courage to leave." Men admitted I didn't realize what my daughter might be facing. For the first time, I felt my pain transforming into something bigger, a weapon against silence. Still, the fear remained. Trial meant facing him again. Wayne would stand a few feet away, smirking, twisting the truth. I would have to look at the man who had tried to erase me and refused to flinch. The night before court, Alvarez found me sitting outside the barracks staring at the North Carolina sky. The air smelled of salt drifting from the coast. He stood beside me quietly for a moment, then said, "Tomorrow you fight a different kind of battle. But remember, you're not alone. Marines stand together." I nodded, my throat tight. What if I freeze? What if he breaks me again? He looked at me steady and unyielding. He doesn't get that power unless you give it. And you won't. You're stronger than you know. You already proved it on that highway. The moonlight glinted on his silver insignia, a reminder of authority and trust. In that moment, I realized this was no longer just about me. It was about every survivor who had ever been told to stay quiet. Tomorrow, my voice would carry theirs too. I straightened, inhaled deeply, despite the pain in my ribs, and whispered the words I needed to believe. He can't control me anymore. The morning of the trial, Oklahoma City was gray and heavy with summer clouds. The air outside the courthouse felt thick, like the weight of everything about to unfold pressed down on the city itself. Reporters clustered near the steps, microphones out, cameras flashing as I walked past in my Marine Corps service uniform. Each click of their shutters echoed louder than my boots on the stone steps. My ribs still ached with every breath, but I stood straight. Pride and fear interlocked in my spine, refusing to let me bend. Inside, the Oklahoma County Courthouse buzzed with quiet tension. Lawyers shuffled papers. Families whispered. Officers in uniform directed people toward the right benches. I took my seat at the front, the prosecution team beside me. Across the aisle sat Wayne. He wore a suit, his hair combed the picture of a respectable man. But his eyes betrayed him cold, calculating, a flicker of arrogance that made my stomach twist. He smirked when our gazes met, as if daring me to look away. I didn't. The judge entered, and the room rose a chorus of creaking benches and murmured respect. Proceedings began with formalities, charges read aloud: attempted murder, aggravated assault. The words rang sharp in the chamber, bouncing off marble walls. I saw Wayne shift slightly, jaw tightening, but his smirk never faltered. His lawyer argued confidently that this was a family dispute gone wrong, that I had chosen to exit the truck in a fit of defiance, that Wayne had been trying to save me, not hurt me. The audacity of it burned, but I forced myself to remain composed. The prosecution laid out their case with precision. They described years of control manipulation and escalating threats. They introduced neighbors who testified to Wayne's temper co-workers, who spoke of his drinking, and police officers who confirmed past calls to the house. My mother was called to the stand. She walked stiffly, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Her voice trembled as she admitted the years of fear, the arguments she had tried to smooth over the bruises she explained away. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "I was too afraid to leave." Her words hung in the air, a quiet indictment of both Wayne and herself. Then it was my turn. The bailiff called my name, and my legs felt like stone as I stood. Each step toward the witness stand echoed. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat under the judge's watchful gaze. The prosecutor began gently guiding me through my childhood, the death of my father Wayne's entrance into our lives. My throat tightened as I spoke, but I steadied my voice. I described the rules, the control, the stolen paychecks, the threats. Each detail felt like lifting another stone off my chest. Then we came to that night. I closed my eyes, briefly inhaled, and told them everything, the speed, the wind, his words, the shove the road rising to meet me. My voice cracked only once when I said I thought I was about to die. The room was silent. Jurors leaned forward, faces intent. Even the reporters in the back stopped scribbling for a moment. The prosecutor nodded, then turned toward the screen. "Your Honor, we would like to admit Exhibit A." The dashcam footage flickered to life. The grainy video showed Wayne's truck swerving, his arm thrusting across the cab, my body tumbling into the dark. Gasps rippled through the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Wayne shifted in his chair, his smirk finally faltering. When cross-examination came, his lawyer pounced. "Private Mitchell," he said smoothly, "isn't it true you had a rebellious streak, that you often clashed with your stepfather?" "Yes," I answered evenly. I resisted his control. "That doesn't mean I jumped from a truck going 90 miles per hour. He pressed harder. "You're trained as a Marine. You're strong, capable. Couldn't it be possible you lost your temper, tried to escape, and this was an accident?" I leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "An accident doesn't laugh as it drives away. An accident doesn't shove you with both hands and watch you hit the road." I didn't jump. I was pushed, and he knew exactly what he was doing. The defense lawyer hesitated, regrouped, then tried again. "You've been exposed to intense training. Could your memory be clouded by trauma?" I didn't flinch. "My memory is sharp. I remember the sound of his voice. I remember the smell of whiskey. I remember his words, 'You're nothing without me.' Trauma doesn't erase the truth. It etches it deeper." The courtroom held its breath. The defense lawyer finally backed away, shaking his head, but the damage was done. The jurors had seen the footage, heard my words, felt the weight of years of control. Colonel Alvarez was called as the final witness. He walked to the stand with the authority of decades of service. His voice was steady as he described what he saw that night, how he pulled over, how he found me broken on the side of I-40. "I have led Marines in combat," he said firmly. "I know the difference between accident and intent. This was intent. He meant to kill her." The words struck like thunder. Wayne's composure finally cracked. He muttered under his breath loud enough that the bailiff stepped closer. His lawyer whispered furiously, trying to contain him, but the image was seared, a man losing the control he had clung to for years. Closing arguments came. The prosecution painted the picture clearly, years of abuse escalating into attempted murder. They replayed the dashcam, reminding the jury of what they had seen with their own eyes. The defense scrambled, insisting it was a tragic misunderstanding, but the words fell flat against the weight of evidence. When the jury filed out to deliberate, my stomach knotted. Time dragged like an endless march. I sat between the prosecutor and Alvarez, my hands trembling. My mother sat behind me, whispering prayers under her breath. Wayne sat across the room, staring at me with eyes full of hate. Hours passed before the jury returned. We rose as the foreperson handed the paper to the judge. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear. The judge unfolded the verdict, his voice solemn. "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault, guilty." The words slammed through the chamber. My knees nearly gave out, but I locked them, refusing to fall. Gasps and murmurs rippled. Reporters scribbled furiously, and my mother broke into sobs behind me. Wayne cursed loudly, his fists clenched, but deputies moved in, restraining him as he shouted. His voice, once so dominant in my life, was reduced to meaningless noise drowned out by the sound of justice delivered. The judge's gavel struck. Sentencing would come later, but the truth was clear. He was guilty. As the courtroom emptied, Alvarez placed a hand on my shoulder. "You stood your ground, Marine. You didn't just survive. You won." Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were the release of years of silence broken in the most public way possible. I had faced him, looked him in the eye, and refused to bow. Walking out of that courthouse, the sky finally broke open, rain falling in sheets. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but I barely heard them. The rain washed across my face, cool and clean, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The day of sentencing arrived with skies so blue it almost felt cruel, as though nature had decided to mock the weight pressing down on all of us inside the Oklahoma County Courthouse. I wore my Marine Corps uniform again, the same pressed fabric I had worn through the trial, and this time I carried it not as armor but as declaration. I was not walking in as a frightened stepdaughter. I was walking in as a Marine demanding justice. Reporters lined the steps, their voices overlapping in a chorus of questions. "Clara, what do you hope for today? Do you feel safe? What will justice mean for you?" I kept my chin high, eyes forward, not because I wanted to ignore them, but because I knew every answer would come in the judge's words. Inside the courtroom hummed with anticipation. Supporters from the community filled the benches. Veterans groups, women's advocacy organizations, even strangers who had followed my case online sat shoulder to shoulder. Some nodded to me as I entered, their silent encouragement more powerful than applause. Colonel Alvarez sat directly behind the prosecution table, his steady presence grounding me. My mother sat 2 rows back, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. Wayne entered, flanked by deputies. He no longer smirked. His suit looked wrinkled, his face pale. For the first time in my life, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He avoided my gaze, staring instead at the defense table as if answers could be found in wood grain. The judge called the room to order. The prosecutor spoke first, laying out the devastation Wayne had caused not just in my life but in the broader community. This was not a family spat, she declared. This was an attempt to extinguish the independence of a young Marine whose only crime was refusing to bow to control. She played the dashcam footage one final time. The room fell silent as the grainy images repeated the shove, the tumble, the abandonment. Some jurors, now seated as spectators, looked away. The defense attorney tried one last desperate plea. He painted Wayne as a man under stress, overwhelmed by life, a man who had made a terrible mistake. But his words felt hollow, stripped of weight by the truth already etched into the minds of everyone present. Then it was my turn. The victim impact statement. My legs shook as I walked to the podium, but my voice when it came was steady. "I grew up believing family was supposed to protect you," I began. Instead, mine became the source of my deepest wounds. For years, I was told I was nothing, that I owed everything, that I had no right to freedom. On that highway, when I hit the pavement at 90 miles per hour, I thought my story was over. But I survived. And I stand here today to say survival is not the end. It is the beginning. He tried to silence me, but today, my voice is louder than it has ever been. I turned toward Wayne, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "You will sit in a cell. I will stand in uniform. You will be remembered for violence. I will be remembered for strength. And that is justice." My words echoed, and for a moment, the entire room was still. Then the judge delivered the sentence: 25 years in Oklahoma State Penitentiary, without the possibility of parole for at least 15. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of approval. Wayne's head snapped up, his mouth opening in protest, but deputies restrained him as he shouted. His voice, once so commanding, now sounded desperate, pathetic. The gavel struck, sealing his fate. The walk out of that courthouse was unlike anything I had experienced. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust, cameras flashing. This time I answered. "Justice doesn't erase scars," I told them, "but it shows survivors that silence is never the answer." Those words appeared on the evening news, in headlines across the state, and even on national networks. "Marine speaks out after stepfather sentenced for attempted murder." Interviews played on repeat my face in uniform paired with the stark dashcam footage. The story went viral on social media, veterans groups sharing it as a rallying cry, advocacy groups using it to push for stronger protections for victims of domestic abuse. At first, the attention overwhelmed me. I wasn't used to being the center of a national conversation. But slowly, I began to see the ripple effect. Letters arrived at the base, some handwritten, others typed. A woman from Kansas wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to leave my abusive husband." A father from Texas said, "I didn't understand my daughter's silence until I heard you speak." Each word reminded me that my pain was no longer just mine. It had become a tool for others to find their voices. Back in Tulsa, reactions were mixed. Some neighbors shook their heads, saying they had always suspected Wayne was dangerous. Others whispered that I had brought shame on the family by airing private matters in public. But the majority of voices were supportive, and even those who whispered could no longer deny what the dashcam had shown. My mother moved out of the house soon after sentencing. She called me one evening, her voice trembling, to say she was staying with a cousin in Arkansas. "I should have left long ago," she admitted. "I see that now. I'm sorry." The apology didn't erase the years of silence, but it cracked open the possibility of healing. I told her I hoped she would find peace, but that my forgiveness would take time. Meanwhile, at Camp Lejeune, my fellow Marines treated me differently. Not with pity, but with respect. They had seen the headlines, heard the verdict. They called me Iron Clara more often, and this time I accepted the nickname with a smile. It wasn't just about surviving the highway. It was about standing in court, standing against fear, standing for something larger than myself. Colonel Alvarez remained a steady presence. He reminded me that the fight wasn't only in courtrooms or on highways. "You've started something bigger," he said. "Use it. Speak when you can. Lead by example. Marines don't just fight battles overseas. Sometimes the battle is right here at home." So I did. I agreed to speak at a local veterans event, standing before a crowd of men and women decades older than me. My voice shook at first, but then steadied. I told them about silence, about control, about the night on I-40. I told them justice was possible. When I finished, applause thundered through the hall. One older woman, a widow of a Vietnam veteran, hugged me afterward and whispered, "You gave me hope for my granddaughter." The fallout wasn't just personal. Politicians referenced my case when debating funding for domestic violence shelters. Advocacy groups quoted my courtroom words in campaigns. What had once been my private nightmare became a public catalyst for change. And yet, even with victory, the shadows lingered. At night, I still dreamed of headlights, of the moment my body left the truck. Some mornings, I woke with my ribs aching, phantom pain reminding me of asphalt scraping skin. Healing wasn't a straight path, but every time doubt crept in, I remembered the sentence, the gavel, the word guilty echoing in that chamber. He no longer had power over me. Months later, when the news cycle moved on, I remained. Stronger scarred, but unbroken. The Marines promoted me to corporal, a moment of pride, marked by Alvarez pinning the chevron on my collar. Standing in formation, hearing my name called, I realized my story had not ended with a fall from a truck or a verdict in court. It had only just begun. Because justice wasn't the end of my fight. It was the foundation of a new life. The months after the sentencing unfolded like a strange new season in my life. For years, I had lived under the shadow of Wayne's control, then under the weight of his violence, and then under the intensity of the trial. When the judge's gavel fell, a chapter closed. Yet freedom felt unfamiliar. I had to learn what it meant to live without fear lurking in every corner. Back at Camp Lejeune, my days settled into the rhythm of Marine life reveille, at dawn drills, training exercises, and the constant hum of discipline that had once seemed so harsh but now felt like home. Each run, each push-up, each moment of sweat reminded me that my body, though battered, was still mine. My ribs healed, my bruises faded, and the scars on my skin became reminders rather than burdens. They told a story I would never forget, but one I no longer feared. At night, though, the memories returned. Sometimes I dreamed of the truck, the door opening, the rush of air. I would jolt awake, breath ragged, the echo of tires fading in my ears. At first, I thought these nightmares meant I was still trapped, still broken. But over time, I realized they meant I was still fighting, still processing. Healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about carrying the memory without letting it crush me. Colonel Alvarez checked in often, not hovering but steady. Sometimes it was a quick nod across the training field, other times a quiet word in passing. He never spoke about himself much, but I knew he had seen war, had carried his own scars. His presence reminded me that survival wasn't weakness, it was strength. He had told me once Marines don't leave their own behind. He proved it every day. My fellow Marines, too, became anchors. They stopped calling me Iron Clara as a nickname and started saying it with respect, even admiration. One evening in the mess hall, a young private approached me nervously. "Corporal Mitchell," he said, "my sister's in a bad situation at home. I didn't know how to talk to her until I read about you." "Thank you." His words humbled me. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a beacon for others. The public attention slowly shifted. Headlines faded, reporters stopped calling, and the story that had once been front-page news became another archived article. But the ripple effects remained. Advocacy groups reached out asking me to speak at events. At first, I hesitated. Telling my story in court had nearly broken me. Could I bear to tell it again in front of strangers? The first time I agreed was at a shelter for women in Raleigh. The room was small, the audience intimate, faces lined with exhaustion eyes, wary but hopeful. I stood before them in uniform, my palms sweating, my heart pounding. I told them about control, about silence, about the night on I-40. I told them justice was possible, even when it seemed unimaginable. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then one woman raised her hand and whispered, "I thought I was alone." That moment changed me. My voice wasn't just for me anymore. It was for anyone who thought their silence would never be broken. In Tulsa, my mother began rebuilding her life. She called occasionally, her tone softer, less afraid. She admitted she was seeing a counselor, that she was trying to forgive herself for the years of silence. Our relationship remained fragile, but it was no longer severed. Slowly, piece by piece, we began to rebuild. I learned to listen without bitterness, and she learned to speak without excuses. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As for Wayne, prison stripped him of the power he had wielded so cruelly. Letters came to me through lawyers, half-hearted apologies, manipulations dressed as remorse. I never responded. He had spoken enough in my life. My silence now was not fear, but choice. He was no longer part of my story. Promotion came unexpectedly. I was called into formation one humid morning, my uniform damp with sweat, my heart pounding with the usual anticipation of inspection. Instead, my name was read aloud. Corporal Clara Mitchell. The chevrons were pinned to my collar, and Colonel Alvarez himself stood before me, steady hands placing them with quiet pride. "You've earned this," he said. In that moment, I realized the uniform wasn't just fabric or rank. It was proof that no one could define me but myself. Closure didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, in the laughter shared with fellow Marines after a long day, in the first night I slept through without dreams of the highway. In the moment, I stood before a crowd and told my story without my voice trembling. In the realization that revenge wasn't rage, it was living strong where he thought I would break. Sometimes I returned in my mind to that night on I-40, to the moment I tumbled from the truck. I remembered the pain, the fear, the certainty that I would die. But now when I replayed it, I didn't stop at the fall. I saw the headlights of the SUV, the boots hitting the ground, the colonel's voice cutting through the night. "Stay with me, Marine. You're safe now." That was the turning point, the proof that no matter how dark it seemed, light could still break through. On the anniversary of the trial's conclusion, I stood at the parade ground at Camp Lejeune, watching the flag rise against the dawn. The air smelled of salt and pine, the cadence of Marines marching echoing across the field. I placed my hand on my chest and whispered to myself I wasn't pushed out. I stood up. The words felt true now, not just a mantra, but a reality. Justice had been served. The scars remained, but they no longer bound me. They marked me as someone who had endured, who had fought, who had survived. My story was not a tragedy, but a testament, and as I looked toward the horizon, I knew this was only the beginning. Because closure wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering with strength. It was about taking back the power stolen from me and using it to light the path for others. And in that sense, I realized I had already won. The road from Tulsa to Camp Lejeune, from fear to freedom, from silence to strength, has not been easy. Looking back, it feels almost impossible that the girl gripping the edge of a pickup truck at 90 miles per hour could be the same woman standing in uniform today. Yet both are me. Both exist. One taught the other how to survive. There are moments when I still catch my breath at odd times, the squeal of tires on wet pavement, the sound of a door slamming shut, the smell of alcohol on a stranger's breath. Triggers, they call them. But I do not crumble when they come. I acknowledge them and I move through them. Because what nearly broke me has become the proof of how far I've climbed. I used to believe revenge meant destruction, an eye for an eye, a chance to scream back into the face of cruelty. But life taught me something else. True revenge is not rage. True revenge is living a life they said you could never have. It is standing tall in the light of day while those who tried to control you sit in the shadows of their own choices. It is waking each morning with purpose, knowing no one owns your steps but you. The Marines gave me that sense of ownership. Every blister, every drill, every drop of sweat shaped me into someone Wayne could never understand. He believed control made him strong. He never understood that discipline, service, and honor are stronger than fear could ever be. I carry the scars of my past, but I do not hide them. They are part of my story, just like the laughter of my fellow Marines, the firm nod of Colonel Alvarez, the rising sun over the training field. Pain and pride coexist side by side. Together, they remind me that strength is not the absence of wounds, but the courage to keep moving forward despite them. For those still trapped in silence, I offer this. Your story is not over. What was done to you does not define you. The scars they leave may shape you, but they cannot erase your worth. Speak when you are ready. Fight when you can, and never forget that survival itself is victory. Sometimes at night, when the world quiets and the base settles into rest, I sit with my journal and write one simple line I was supposed to break, but I didn't. That sentence carries everything. It is my past, my present, and my future. So if you ever wonder what became of the girl on I-40, know this: she rose. She put on the uniform, she stood in court, she claimed her voice, and she found peace not in vengeance, but in the steady strength of a life reclaimed. And that is the story I will carry always.